ready.
Whenever you're ready.
All right.
It's going to go audit, single audit, and then finance.
Okay.
Okay.
Derek, are you going to be able to go to different pages if I send it, or?
Yep.
Okay.
You guys, why did we put this after lunch?
Welcome. We are meeting as the Provo City School Board of Education. We are here at the Grandview Technology Center, 1591 North Jordan Avenue on Friday, October 1st, 2021.
We probably, looking back, we probably should have simply adopted that approach rather than building a whole new structure called home study, because I think
We're watching an old.
Oh, that's an old board meeting. You hear your voice, Keith, and wonder what is happening.
Yeah.
That was me.
What is going on?
Let's move on. That was a year ago.
All right, so it is Friday, October 1st, 2021, and we are convened as the Board of Education, and we will begin with a roll call. I'm Melanie Hall, Board President.
Rebecca Nielsen, Board Vice President.
Jennifer Partridge, board member.
Nate Bryson, board member.
Terry McCabe, board member.
Gina Hales, board member.
Keith Rattel, superintendent.
Derek Anderson, business administrator.
All right, is there a motion to convene?
So moved.
All right, we are now in study session.
All right.
What we've got, what we're going to present to the board right now is our financial results for the prior year, where we ended, along with what is called the single audit, and that is.
You need the microphone for you.
Thank you. And what is called the single audit. The single audit does testing of internal controls and to see where, if we are, complying with federal guidelines. And so from what you'll notice and what the auditors will point out is Devin and the team is very amazing. There were no findings this year. So either on the single audit or financial audit. So, but from now forward, I'll turn the time over to our auditors and Devin.
Thanks, Derek. Kind of stole the show there with the no findings, but. All right. So first of all, I just want to thank the board for our continued relationship. We really enjoy and appreciate our relationship with the school district. We've been doing it a few years now. And, we also want to just kind of make you guys aware that Devin and her team do a great job. They take their job seriously. They got a lot to do with the numbers, internal controls. We enjoyed working with Steph. Now we're getting to know Derek better. And so you got a great team, and we've been impressed. So. My name's Sean Martin. I'm the manager over the financial audit. So I'm just going to present our audit opinion, and then Aaron, he will present the federal single audit and other compliance reports, and then Devin will get into the numbers, and then Aaron and I will be around as well when Devin presents, so we can field any questions if necessary. So our opinion actually starts on page 15. This whole report, collectively known as your comprehensive annual financial report, this is the district's document. This is prepared by management. The only piece that we claim as our own as the auditors is our audit opinion, which starts on page 15.
And I think he has the one.
He has a PDF or page 15 of the.
Yeah, that's where it is. Right? This is where it would be.
That's the opinion.
So do you want to elaborate on that?
So I will elaborate. So we issued what's an unmodified opinion. It's a clean opinion. It's the highest opinion we can issue, and I'll just read you our actual opinion paragraph. It says, in our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the district. So basically, no findings, clean opinion. Before I pass the mic over to Aaron, I just wanted, I think if you do go to page 8, I think it was in this one.
Page what?
Page 8. page 8 and 9, I'll just draw your attention to a couple certificates that Devin and her team have been awarded for consecutive years now, a few years. She's got the GFOA Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting, and this is not an easy document to prepare. Every year it gets reviewed by the GFOA, and Devin and her team have been awarded the certificate for numerous years. Page 9 is just another certificate that she's gotten from the Association of School Business Officials, so specific to schools, if you want to go to page 9. So this is the second certificate that she's got, and not everybody gets these. They don't just hand them out. You got to meet their standards, and so just to kind of spotlight Devin and her team doing a great job. So thanks. I'll turn it over there.
Thank you very much. It's easy to talk about a report that is, about 100 pages long, but there's a lot of blood and sweat and tears that go into that, and many late hours. One number needs to tie about 4 or 5, sometimes a dozen different places, and so you need to really make sure that this document reconciles, and so it is a feat. And generally, we participate as auditors in the preparation of that to a very large extent. That is not the case here. It is truly a document that is prepared internally, and that is a very important distinction because it's not common, and so I do want to just underscore what Sean said. So yes, I will be talking about the federal single audit and the other compliance reports. So there are 4 reports in here, and when you spend at least $750,000 in one fiscal year, you are required to have a federal single audit. And all that means is that they want us to make sure that you are complying with the agreements and other compliance requirements of each of the grants that you are given. And so instead of going through and testing every one of them, they give us procedures on how to whittle down what are considered major and non-major grants, and then we will do a lot of different procedures on them based on their classification. The federal government will automatically classify certain grants as high risk. Most definitely, every time you are in the first year of a cycle or the last year of the cycle of a grant, it is considered high risk. This year, any kind of funding that is labeled coronavirus is absolutely high risk, and so it kind of takes auditor judgment away from that, and so we've selected more grants this year because of that. If you have a grant that is ongoing, then we are required to test it every 3rd year. And so you have a lot of funding, nutrition, Title I, et cetera, where you are getting these grants every single year. And so not only do we have to make sure that we get rotation, but we also have to assess whether something is high risk or not. And so you'll see here, I don't know the page numbers, but I'm going to say it's 9 or 10. If you could go to that, then it's not hyperlinked, sorry. And this will just tell you the grants that we tested right here. Scroll down a little bit more. Here at the bottom of the page, it tells you the 4 grants that we selected as major grants. Of course, the COVID-19 Coronavirus Relief Fund and the Title I grant, and then COVID-19 Education Stabilization Fund. That is in many subparts. We roll them up all into one. You have the ESSER's grant, the governor's grant, and the other grants that fall into that, but it's all lumped into one, and then your Medicaid cluster. So those are the grants that we tested this year, and when we do procedures on federal grants, we have to look at the internal control environment, and we actually will issue a report about that. And so one of the things that we do is we make sure that all of the compliance requirements are being dealt with. What that means is, are they familiar with it? Do you have staff members here that know what they're doing? And when they don't, is there a good resource they can go to, whether it's internally or externally? A lot of times your grants are passed through, and so you're receiving it through another entity, such as the State Board of Education. They get it directly from the federal government, and then they will disseminate it to the various school districts. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that the people we are dealing with can either find out the information on their own, or they have a good resource where to get it. We do not expect everyone to know everything about everything. And so we felt very comfortable when we would ask our questions of the various grant administrators that they were very familiar with the requirements. And when I would ask them, when you have questions, who do you go to? They had the name, the address, phone numbers. I felt very comfortable that each of these individuals knew what they were doing and were complying to the best of their ability to the requirements of the grants. And I always use a term called audit warm fuzzies. I know that when I am talking to somebody, I can assess really quickly if the person is truly doing what they're supposed to be doing, or I have to worry about them. And that comfort level is very good for me to achieve quickly, because I don't expect them to say, oh, I have this right here, I can just spin my chair around, grab it, it's right there. But I know that if they say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, I'll get back with you. And in 10 minutes, they come back to where I'm sitting and they say, here it is, and they give me a nice, good explanation. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And that's how I felt throughout the testing of the federal single audits here. And so then we'll go back up to the top and we'll just go through each of the reports now. This first one, right, one more up. There's so many reports, you can get lost. I think this is the first one in. So this is the internal controls over financial reporting and compliance in accordance with government auditing standards. And so we like to call this GAS, obviously. And so we will go through and we will make sure that all of the controls surrounding government auditing standards in general are being complied with, and we had no findings, no exceptions on this, or no deficiencies as they call it. So if you can go to the next report, and this is one on the uniform guidance. Uniform guidance is the guidance over federal grants. And so, again, we need to make sure that not only the first one was in general government auditing standards, but now it's with specifically federal funding. And they complied with all of the OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, compliance supplements. And also at the grant agreement level, we had no findings in this regard as well. If you can go to the next page, or the next document. So this right here is your summary of all grants expended during the year. You have, if you scroll down a little bit, I don't expect anyone to see this, right there, you've spent just north of $19 million this year. I'm sure this isn't a shock to anyone that you're spending this much and you're getting this much federal funding, but it is a significant amount, and so you can see that that document is very large and you have a lot of different grants. For us to come here and test every single one of them would be very inefficient, and so that's why we test only certain ones that are higher risk. If you'll go down now, that concludes the portion on the federal funding. Before I go to the state side, does anybody have any questions about the federal single audit? Yeah, I wouldn't either. All right, so this document summarizes that we had no findings, and so no in this regard is a good thing. So if you'll go down to the next letter here.
Unmodified, don't explain that.
unmodified is a clean opinion. So if we have to modify something, that isn't a positive thing. So modifying means that we have to say, except for this area, we can give an opinion on this. Or we could not access auditable documents, and so therefore we have to disclaim an opinion. So what you want is an unmodified opinion, and that's what we issued in both regards, both on the type of auditor's report as well as on the compliance for major programs. We're both unmodified. This just says you had no findings in the current year or the prior year for both question costs as well as internal control over financial reporting. And then this is the letter that we have to issue on the Utah State Compliance Audit Guide. So you can see here these various bullet points. Every single year, the State Auditor's Office tells us there are certain procedures we want you to do annually, and there are certain procedures we want you to do every third year. And so we assess that based on the applicability with the school district, and then we will go and test each one of these. Budgetary compliance, that means did you have any funds where you were over budget? And if you are, even if it was $1, they want us to report that as a finding. Fund balance, you are required by state law to have a positive fund balance in all of your funds. And if you have any kind of a deficit, we need to report that. Restricted taxes and related revenues. Are you spending your restricted tax revenues or other restricted revenues in the manner in which they were restricted? Open and Public Meetings Act. Are you guys being trained as a governing body? And are the minutes to your public meetings being approved and uploaded timely as per state code? And all of these other things we are looking at and we are doing these compliance testing and requirements on. And we did not find any issues for the fiscal year ended 2021. So does that mean that the entity is absolutely perfect in every way?
Yes. Say anything else.
It means that you guys are doing a great job. Now, I give an experience. When I was 16 years old, I was caught speeding, and could not afford the ticket, and so I called them and I said, "What can I do?" And they said, "Go to this class and you can not have to pay for it." And I'm like, "That's great." And I remember a police officer telling me that if I told you right now that I was going to follow you home, and you knew I was following you home, I could still pull you over for something you were doing wrong. And you knew I was doing that. So is that, I use that as an example of, you want employees that work hard and that try hard to do everything that they're supposed to. Are we going to find the occasional mistake? Absolutely. That's why you have an audit. Most of the time, when we do an audit, it's not because we're looking for fraud. It's because we're there just to make sure that those honest mistakes are fixed. We want to make sure that you have an internal control environment that has enough reviews in it so that when a mistake is caught, not if, but when a mistake is caught, your internal control environment will catch that before it goes out the door. So, for instance, if your first level person reconciled a bank account, the second level comes and sees that there was an error, is that a finding? Is that a problem? Absolutely not. That means your internal control environment is working as designed. It caught the honest mistake, it's kicked back down, it's fixed, it goes back to the review, and then you're okay. So we expect to see those kind of deviations, those kind of occasional small errors that are being fixed all the time. And that's what I really like to see. And so I believe that by and large, Provo City School District's management, accounting department, et cetera, has great employees, they're very experienced, and they want to do a great job, and they do a great job. I think it's important to, as a governing body, that you understand that, and so I'm now willing to answer any questions that you may have before I turn the time over to Devin and get into the nuts and bolts of the financial data. So anybody ever heard an auditing joke before? So the one that I hear all the time is, what is the definition of an auditor? It's someone who goes in after a war and bayonets the wounded. And a lot of times people feel that's what it is by being audited, and so I thought that was pretty funny. So I will now turn the time over to Devin, and we will be back here if you have any questions as she presents the data. We're happy to answer them.
I wish I had a joke. I'm not much of a joke teller. I'm not very funny. So I'm just here to talk a little bit about the finances as you're looking at the CAFR. This is the only presentation where I know no one is going to care and not a lot of people are going to listen. So we're going to do our best to tell you something that might be interesting. So the CAFR that they're talking about is not a required document for school districts. There actually aren't a lot of school districts that do it. The financial piece of it is required on the governmental side, but it's really a good thing to do, especially when you're bonding or when you're investing money, because it gives those entities a little bit of a better idea of where you stand financially overall. So there's two separate financial statements we have to create, and one is the government-wide, one is the governmental. So government-wide, what I call it, you can go to the first page, what I call it is the worst-case scenario. So this is if everyone, all of the entities in the state were to go belly up, all of our employees were to retire and quit at the exact same time, everything was to come due at the end of a year. So this basically says where our financial position is. So for example, oh yikes, that is really small. I should probably break it down just a little bit, but that's great. So this will give, on the balance sheet or on the statement of net position for governmental or government-wide funds, you have all of your assets, you have all of the things that you have as deferred outflows, which for the most part for us are just property taxes and the refunding on bonds that we have. And then we have all of the liabilities. That's where you see a lot of the differences when you're looking at it. This is a 4-year comparison, so you can kind of see a lot of things don't change a lot because it's a lot of the same numbers every year. But if you go right here on the net OPEB liability, this is the amount that we will pay for post-employment benefits for prior employees and for current employees that are on the plan. And you'll see that that number has changed quite a bit over the year. We start in 2018 with a $30.5 million, and now we have a $21 million. Same with pensions. That's the URS payment. We don't make this payment. This is our portion of the URS liability. So this would be the amount that we would need to pay if the URS went away, which it's not going to. It's statutorily protected. So on your net pension liability, it went from 40 million to 59 million to 38 million to 22 million. So it's very, very volatile based on investment results, based on what they feel is going to be paid, how many people have long lives. So both of those are pretty they change every year based on a lot of different numbers. So those are really a lot of the numbers, but if you go down to the bottom, so when you see the negative unrestricted portion, that doesn't mean that we're negative upside down in the district as a whole. It just means that our liability for those issues, the OPEB and the pension, are going to take up a lot of our unrestricted fund balance if we had to pay that all at one time. And you can see it's gone down quite a bit. From the first year we had to report for 36 million down to 28.9 negative. So if you scroll over to the right where you can see.
To where?
So over on the
This far side?
left side of the page, yeah. So this is where you see a huge amount of the difference. So this one here is our URS. So right now, this is our total pension liability, which includes an asset, which is why it doesn't tie exactly. But if we were to have a 1% decrease in the investment and in their projections, it could be a $75 million liability for us. And if it's a 1% increase, we would have an asset of $22 million. So it's really not a number that we can, stake a pin in and know that that's going to be the same year over year, because it's really different. But the entities, like bonding entities, want to know what our worst case scenario would be so they can rate us properly. So, and then on the long term, you'll see this year. So this year, our liabilities went down between the two, almost a little over $23 million. And you'll see that reflected on the expenses on the other piece of the government-wide financial statements, which is called the Statement of Activities. And if you want to go to the next page.
Devin, will you explain one thing real quick?
Yeah.
We explain why our cash balance increased so much from when it's been steady the last 3 years, and then this year it's so much.
Yep, and that's the bond proceeds from the Tempview bond that we issued this year.
So that's all pretty much claimed for. It's not available. It's tied up.
And when you look at fund balances, a lot of that is restricted. So if you go down to the bottom of this, where you can see these are our net positions and these are restricted, our only unrestricted funds are 28.9 negative, and then the rest of it is restricted for something or not able to be transferred into cash. Like our buildings, we're not going to go out and sell all of our schools today, but that would be that's part of what is part of those assets. So then this is our statement of activities that shows the expenses. So when you're looking at those huge jumps in our OPEB and in our pension liabilities, you'll see our expenses went significantly down from the prior year, and that's because those differences are reflected in those expenses by function, based on what function people work for. And then the revenues are up because those are not impacted by the volatility of those two. It's all there run through the expenses. So a couple years ago, we had a lot of increases because we put on a lot more assets, where other times you'll see it go down. It just depends on what happens on the government-wide side. Any questions so far on government-wide? Okay. So we'll go to the next page. This is what actually happens. We report, this is what happened this year. This is what any changes are. You'll see that a lot of our revenues changed in some ways. So our property taxes went up, which that is a normal thing. Last year we went through a truth in taxation, so that's the increase in our tax revenue. Our other local sources went down significantly. A lot of that was the things that we have listed down here. Our earnings on investments are down $1.2 million. Our interest rates have gone down quite a bit with the PTIF, but we are legally required to follow the Utah Money Management Act with the money that we have. So, we're not going to get any huge returns because we can't take risks with public money. Food services went down, but that's because we're not required to charge for for meals right now. All of the meals are provided without cost to the students. And then the rest of them, it was mostly just property taxes that increased on our local revenue total. State of Utah went up about $5 million. That is a mixture of the WPU increase for the year and then also new state money, most specifically the COVID bonuses that they gave to the schools. And then our federal revenue, of course, went up just a little bit because of the ESSER and GEARS funds. And then let's go to the last page. And this is our expenditures. This is a 2-year comparison of where we were function-wise. Most of the functions stayed relatively flat. There were some where we had to switch based on state requirements. They really are giving more and more feedback on where people need to be paid from. So it's based on what their objective is. So our teachers, instructional aides that are in the classrooms, our instruction, and then you start going down into the supporting functions, like the student support is social workers, counselors, nurses, the occupational therapists and special ed, and then you have instructional staff. That's teacher training, those are coaches, people that are not in the classroom but are providing assistance to the teachers and the schools. And then it just goes down between those. You see a big jump in our capital outlay, and that's just really Timpview, the building of Timpview. But for the most part, everything else stayed relatively even to prior, no big jumps one way or the other. So, any questions?
You got your admin costs down a little bit. People be a little bit less mad.
Well, we were really working on trying to make sure we were getting people in the right function. Are they more district admin, or are they more supporting the schools on a school-by-school basis? And when you're evaluating people's jobs, it makes it a little easier to say they're not out there just for a district admin position. It's more of a school support. So that's why you'll see a little bit of fluctuation in that.
And that's one of the reasons why other districts appear better than we do, because they've been a lot more fastidious about doing that than we have been, and now we're trying to clean that up.
Well, and they take also a little bit of the descriptions a little bit more, I don't know, liberally. They will apply it, and with some of the admin functions, they do have a lot more of the economy of scale idea. You don't need as many, you have more people, but there are more students to spread that around with.
So are you saying that Derek's more open to interpreting what is admin than...
No, some other districts are. I think it's more other districts are more open to interpreting what admin is.
Derek brought that culture into life.
Well, he's brought a great culture to our office. So making sure that we're doing things well and within the state guidelines.
I'm all for grinding that down as small as possible.
I will do my very best.
And I'm all for you blaming Derek for things.
I'm not sure that I'm in a position to blame Derek for anything, and so I'll leave that up to you guys. I'm really appreciative of having him here. So, okay. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you.
I will say this. I appreciate Devin immensely and what she does for our team, and she's a big reason why I came. I respect her immensely, and as I've got to work with her through the state, and absolutely love her as a person. And so I got you a gift for all your hard work.
Oh, yay. Can we clap for that?
First time accountant has ever been given a gift.
Normal thing.
All right, so the next piece, we previously talked about this a little bit. This was the tax restructuring and how it will impact the district, okay? So what you see here currently is our current rates, okay? There's, I've rounded things to the nearest increment, okay? And so it's not exact, but it's really close. So what you can see here is we've got our board levy, our board guarantees that we're receiving from the state, our voted levy, our voted guarantees that we receive from the state, and then our capital levy, okay? So in the future, so the way this works is the way the law is written is this is on a 5-year look back. So they say, it goes and says, okay, whatever the rate has been the highest in the last 5 years, that's what we will give you, okay? And so because it's on that little provision is in the state, it's kind of giving us a little bit of flexibility and a loophole to float our tax rates to be the most beneficial to us. So I want to show you what will happen if we float this around, okay? So if we float this down to 0, watch what happens. We still get the full 9.4 million, okay? And it will come from the state entirely. Now, we will have 10 increments that we can offload to other levies. So we could come over here and say, we want to go up 10 increments to capital, and it will pay for the bonds in entirety. Or we could say we want to do 7 increments, which would cover 4 million of the 6 million, and then we want to come over here and increase this and generate an extra 2.5 million for the board for raises. Okay, so then what would happen is in 5 years, okay, let's say we did this and it was chose that we would pay for the bonds in the entirety. Then in 5 years, what would happen is we would drop this back down to the 13, pump this back up to where it was for 1 year, and then go right back to this. Ooh, no. No, this is harder without a mouse. Right there. And then that would sit there for another 4 or 5 years, and then we would flip it back. So that what that does is that right now it shows you our current increments at 10 increments, 33.1 million, but if we float the rates, we'll get 40 million in funding will have, come into the district, okay? So that's at 10 increments. If we go to 13 increments, which is what the voters have approved, okay? So this is something the voters have approved, but we're not maximizing our levies, okay? So if we push the voted levy to 13 increments next year, say we go through truth and taxation, push this to the 13 increments, what you can see here is you sum all these up, it goes from 33.1 to 35, okay? Then at that point, when we shuffle it, you drop that to 0. Now we're going to get 12.2 from the state instead of 9.4 from the state, and that would happen for 4 or 5 years. 4 years, and on the 5th year we have to flip it back. Then it would allow us to offload 16 increments. So you could do 10 here, and then, 13 increments, and then 3 here. And that would bring in 42.1 instead of the 33.1. That's annual, that's every year. If we go to the 16 increments, so then this would be a future. This would be something the board, I recommend in the future, as we do this and we can explain to the public, hey, look, we are using our taxes efficiently.
You need the microphone.
Don't use your microphone because then Alpine's going to do it.
That's right. But one of the things we need to do is we need to, when we start using and doing this and utilizing the tax rates in the most efficiently way possible, we need to go to the public and say, give us the full 16 increments. Because if we get the public to approve the 16 increments without raising taxes, you just say, give us the 16 increments, we won't raise taxes by doing this, and this is what it can do, okay? So what would happen is this 11 plus 3, 14, $15 million, right, out of the voted, would all be paid by the state on the years that are off years, and then we could pay for the bonds pretty much in the entirety and pay for some raises over here. But it would give us 43.4 million instead of the 33.1 that we're currently at, okay? And that's every single year. So then I've gone and done, I wanted to show the board this because I know it's right here, that's more of a graphical explanation. So you could see what would happen as we were doing it. Is this not the one? No, I want to open up it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, you can see those numbers kind of. Okay, so here's kind of where we're currently at. These are some rounded numbers too. Okay, the way this works is this is our board guarantees, our board rate, our voted rate, voted guarantees, and then capital. So this is the next year. But this is keeping the rate current. This is never going through truth and taxation throughout this entire scenario, just to show you this equivalency, okay? So 3.92. The very next year, wait a second, did I not get that right? Oh, sorry, that's rounded. Okay, that's why. All right, so it is the same. So then what happens is we're shifting this out of here, the voted, to 0, and we're offloading it to here, and I put some up here. That brings it up to the 38 million, right? So that's essentially a $6.5 million increase right out there next year. Then that carries forward for 4 years, 5 years, and then this next year we would have to shift it back, okay, to make sure we get this back in alignment with what it needs to be, so that way on that 5-year look back, so we'd have a 1-year dip in funding, and then it would jump right back up to this. And in the bulk of the dip, you can see would be in capital. So what would happen is this year we are planning ahead of time to pay the bonds and build up a fund balance to pay for the bonds with our fund balance, okay?
Just be like a sinking fund or something?
Pretty much. You see, what you do is you build up over those years, essentially that fund balance or sinking fund, just to cover that year and then reset it in the next year. Now, that's under the current law. We can do this if the state legislature ever says, you guys are taking advantage of the system. It would require us to go through truth and taxation to pay for the bonds, which we'd have to do that anyways. So
is that the only risk?
What was that?
Is that the only risk?
That's pretty much the only risk.
Is there, why isn't everybody doing this? Because you're just smarter than everybody else right now?
Why don't we do it?
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm like going.
But then you'd get addicted to it.
So do we need to hurry and do this before anybody catches us?
So.
Well, what are we going to raise our rates next year? Pay these bonds?
Just stop saying these things out loud.
Is that the plan?
By
anyway, was that what you were
these
showing us
comments,
right
these
there? It's like,
comments.
okay, let's do truth and taxation.
Yeah, no,
so
it
we
was
maximize
guaranteed.
it. So then we're playing a bit of a risky game. We're putting it off a year before we start getting that sweet free money.
Yep. So we can structure that. We could do it this next year. We could do a little bit where we do all of this and maybe go through truth and taxation a little bit, for the raises and things that were discussed. But as you can see, the one piece on the 13 increments, we've got to keep that. It hasn't been that way in the last 5 years. It hasn't been pushed that 13 increment amount.
If we do 13, then you can pretty much do raises with that extra money, right?
Yeah, correct.
How much, the increments of 13, what would that put us at for like raises, like starting salary, like where would that put us?
So that would put us at, so let me do this really quick. 13 increments would generate, I think it was 2 million extra. Yeah, it was 2 million extra. So 2 million extra, we would be able to raise everybody, all the teachers, the starting pay would raise pretty much on, if I'm looking at going off the bonus that we talked about earlier, or that was discussed, or negotiated previously. But based off of those amounts, it would be essentially double that from the ones that were negotiated. So the one that's scheduled is 675, and the 1%, if you doubled that, that would be 2 million.
Is that enough for what we want to do in the future?
So that would, I mean,
That it depends.
it's definitely not going to get us, put us at the top by any means. It would definitely do it without having to go through.
But to get to 16, we'd have to do a vote.
To get to the 16 increments, we would have to go to the public to vote, because that's a ballot measure.
That's a ballot measure.
That is a ballot measure.
But 13's already approved.
13's already approved. So we can do this scenario and go from the 33 that we're currently getting, on this one, and get up to 42 just based off of what we're currently doing. There's just based off our current approval.
This bond is going to be...
It's about $6 million a year. So that by doing this, we could pay for the bond pretty much in its entirety, and not raise taxes, but at the same time, I mean, you take...
So there's a chance we would have to take the bond out if they change the law, is what you're saying?
Correct. Well, we'd have to raise taxes to cover it.
But we'd be 5 years down the road of paying it off.
Right, so the bond amount would not be as high as...
No.
Yeah. And it would also depend on if they change the law, how they change the law. Because what could happen is they'd say, look, we're no longer allowing this. And so they may say you can get this back over a few years, and so increase it a little bit each year to get back, but it just depends.
So that would free up more capital for other future things we need to.
Yep.
So, okay, I just want to make sure I'm getting this correct. Just by shifting things around,
Yep.
we can pay for the bonds without having to actually increase the amount people are paying on their property taxes.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Depends on how.
Depending on outside factors and how it all plays out. But worst case scenario, things don't play out how they might be, how you're showing them to us. We just raise the tax rate to cover the bond.
Which
is kind of what we were planning anyways.
Correct.
So this is kind of like a really excellent surprise for the public, right? A really great thing for everyone to know that we can probably do these two schools potentially without having to raise taxes.
Correct. And by doing this too, it opens up the avenue to really raise our teacher salaries to a very competitive place.
Right, because then it just gives us some flexibility for other things we may need to put priority on, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Where does the guaranteed money come from?
The state.
The state, but what fund?
So it comes from the Park City.
This is recorded. 6 people. We're all in here.
So it's going to come from those wealthier districts that have a lot of property value, and there's the state has a bucket where it pulls from. So I believe some of it comes from sales tax, some of it comes from the property taxes from this other tranche of funding, but it comes from the state, and that's going to come from other districts that have high values, and then other like the sales taxes.
Okay. And if everybody does this,
They'll probably shut it down.
then it ruins it?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we have to do?
Just keep it quiet.
Now we'll all broadcast. Completely public. No, not today.
Come on.
No, so really what would have to happen is as we build the budget, okay, I would just need some direction from the board saying, we want to do this, let's do this, build the budget based off of doing what you're talking about.
And quickly, do we need to get to 16 to do this, or we can do this on 13?
We can do this on 13.
Okay. So then I say we do it on 13.
Do we need to vote on this?
Not right now, no.
In 13, we need truth and taxation?
No, so to get to 13, so here's the kicker on the 13. We won't need to do truth and taxation. What we can do, and let me show you. So we're currently sitting at 17, 1, and 13. What we can do to get to the 13 increments is lower our capital from 13 to 10 and bump this from there to 13 for 1 year, and then right off the gate, then start running it. So that wouldn't require TNT to do.
I don't see a super big downside to this, really.
So just make sure, so 16, it would be a ballot measure, something that has to go to the public.
Correct.
Voting.
Correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, once, the public has already allowed us 13 increments, and so to go above it, 14, 15, 16, the public would have to be a ballot measure. Right now, we can manage the 13 increments how we see fit. So we just, because in the last, I don't know, 5-7 years, it hasn't pushed back up to that 13. That high water mark that on the 5-year look back has dropped every year as property values have gone up.
So can you show me playing with those numbers? Like worst case scenario, we do this and then they change the law. Where would we be at then?
So it wouldn't change our rates, okay? We could still move the rates around how we want. What the worst case scenario would be this. Say they change the legislature because we then went from this to this, and then, well, for the sake of just ease, we did this, okay? And that means it's all coming from the state, this voted tranche. This is all coming from the state. And then we pump this way up here, right? So what would happen, depending on how they pass the law, what would potentially happen is we would have to move it right back the very next year, back to, like this and this, to cover the wages, salaries, things like that, that are already in the general operating fund, because that's what this is covering. And so then over here, we wouldn't have enough to cover our bonds, which would then require us to go through truth and taxation to pay for the bonds, or go through truth and taxation to pay for those. So that's worst case scenario. If they end it and say, this is done this year, we would then be required to go through truth and taxation to pay for the bonds, which we were already planning on doing.
Well, we already approved the MBA for the bonds, right?
So that is correct. So the MBA, we'd issue the bonds, and then when those bonds are issued, there's essentially be a $6 million payment that would come with it.
Oh, okay.
So we're still, we still issue the bonds, but this just covers the payments.
So this, covers the payment. If we didn't do this, the board would be required to increase taxes to cover that.
Okay.
Can I give you a gift?
I was told I was fired, so.
Give her whatever you gave her and you.
Questions? Okay.
I think it's great. Yeah, I think it's great too. I'm all for it.
I'll tell you
Okay,
later.
do you guys have any more questions for Derek about this? All right, if not, we're going to move on to public perceptions. Keith, you want to start that off?
Yeah, we put this on the agenda, let's see here, last Wednesday, Melanie, Rebecca, and Gina and I met, and Derek, and talked about just some ongoing perceptions that we're having a hard time shaking. And Gina, you may have do you have some willingness to talk about some of the things you raised?
I don't remember what I said. Blur.
Then I can say it.
Are you talking about the Provo High?
That's one of them, yeah.
I know that as I've talked to people in the public as I was campaigning as well as after I was elected, one of the things that really hurts, at least from my interactions with people, is the perceptions that happen surrounding the Provo High bond and the moving of the high school. Most people say we don't trust you guys with bonds because, you know, I think it was 70+%. The public approved.
70.82.
So 70+%. The public approved a bond with the understanding, or at least what everybody thought, was that it was going to stay in place. And then I know there's something about 10 years of promises of no bonds. That got brought up, but that was secondary. At least in my conversations, it was secondary to, we wanted the school to be rebuilt where it was, and then all of a sudden, it was moved to the west and we didn't have any say. And so there's been boundary changes, which I know nobody likes. There's just been a lot of things that have happened, but I would say in my experience in talking to people, that is one of the biggest ones that I hear, is that they felt, for me, and again, I wasn't on the board at the time, it felt like a switch and bait, or bait and switch. Like, here's what we want, here's what, we want to do. As soon as we approve it, everything got changed. And so there's been, in my opinion, some damaged trust. And I also, I would love to fix it. I feel like we're going to be paying for that for at least another decade, maybe more. Because people that I talk to anyway just don't trust that when we say we're going to do something or bond or whatever, that we're actually going to do what they feel that they've been told that we're going to do.
I have a question. When was the last time that the school district made a boundary change? I don't remember. I know it's not been in my time on the board, and I've been here 5 years. Is there anyone close to 5 years?
I think it would have been when Wasatch was moved to feed into Provo High School, and now then to Timpview. Jason?
Yeah, the 2007-8 school year.
Was that when it changed from
so it's been like
north-south boundary to an east-west boundary?
They reboundaried areas around Sunset View, Main Earhart, and Lakeview came on board that next school year, 8-9. They moved space for Franklin and Spring Creek to redo the boundaries around,
So it was a doozer, like it was like everything all at once, and that was 7-8.
I think they did at the end of the 7-8 year to start for the 8-9 school year.
In 08, okay, started in 08. So we're talking 13 years ago? And we're still hearing.
And I had someone approach me the weekend, probably 2 weeks ago, about that. I mean, it gets brought up now and then, but the last time was about 2 weeks ago that someone approached me about the boundary changes. I get approached all the time about the Provo High stuff. The amount of money that it was, why, we were told one thing and not the other. I mean, and then something else was done. So I'm approached about this all the time.
So this is just interesting. I'm just thinking out loud because this is interesting to me because my son is a senior. My oldest child is a senior in high school right now. And he was not affected by the boundary changes. Sounds like he came on right after they happened. He went to kindergarten right after they happened. So this is an entire generation of school children, and people are still bringing that up, which is, my point is that public perception lasts for a long time, and it can be really, really difficult to change perceptions. Or for people to forgive and forget, or whatever it is we're aiming for, or whatever. But so that's why I'm trying to put this in perspective. I'm trying to think time-wise how long this has been.
With that boundary change, I mean, it kind of destroyed the Timpview Provo High rivalry, I think, because before it was like you knew a lot of the same people, you did a lot of the same things, and now it seems like my kids, they didn't have too many friends with Provo High. And maybe it's different in different parts of the city. Now it's like Orem, and you don't really do much with Provo High.
It's like we have two different cities almost.
Yeah.
Was before it was.
So before
it was
you
more
felt like it was
north-south.
more integrated.
Oh yeah, I mean, I dated, people from Provo High, and we did stuff with Provo High people all the time. We fought them all the time. It was like a thing.
And you're lamenting the fact that they don't have fights anymore.
Yeah, because that's part of the thing. And, even with the school moving, because we'd go for lunch there, because everyone from Timpview goes where Provo High used to be. And so probably for all the parents, that was such a thing, is the two schools were so integrated, and then they moved Wasatch out. And, Wasatch works fine with Timpview, but it meant my kids, they just don't go west. They don't really do many sports things with those kids. It's just,
I think
it's now all Orem.
It has increased the east-west divide. I think it's made it a lot worse. Because before we had half the benches and it went up to the east. So he's right. Those kids knew each other and they also knew the kids in the west. But
So are
when
we now advocating for boundary change? That
No.
I think
just
we're
some
just trying to
observations.
explain.
But I just have to say,
we bused people in before. I mean, I had all kinds of friends who lived. It's probably where Spring Creek is. Some of those schools now they were bused in, so it was kind of patchwork. It didn't really make sense. It was annoying going to visit your friends, but it was more. It was like two city schools instead of two separate schools. So
see, I have a different observation where my oldest son, he has lots of friends at Timpview. He went to Timpview's homecoming and not Provo High's. I mean, so maybe my experience is a little different, or maybe my kid's way more friendly than your kid.
Too. So there's a little bit of Grandview that comes over, but it's not like it used to be. Like when I was a kid, you just did a ton of stuff with Provo High, right, Terry? I mean, there was just a lot of stuff.
I mean, when I was a kid, I played soccer with the other girls on the other side of town.
Yeah, you did everything with
But once I got into high school, I didn't really have anything to do with.
Well,
I just think parents who grew up with that, they see how it's different. And now, to me, and I could be totally different, now I do tons of stuff with Orem parents at Orem High. And I do way more with Orem High than I do with Provo.
Well, back to the point of this conversation. I think with some people, when there's one thing that really frustrates them or upsets them, with those individuals, it's hard. I would think most people in the district wouldn't have an issue with boundary changes because it has been so long.
Yeah.
As far as I agree, we need to do whatever we can to show the public that we're doing our best to be good stewards and to help our students and that they can trust us. With the issue of the Provo High move, I think there's a core group of people that I don't know how we can help them overcome that. I feel that with Dixon, we've been very open about what our intentions are. We're not trying to pull wool over anybody's eyes. We've said we're looking at this, we're looking at that. We've made a decision. So I don't know where they're feeling that we're trying to be dishonest or that we can't be trusted, I guess. So I think we work with the individuals who have concerns. And generally, as a district, we continue with what, like Caleb was doing, that we keep our communications going and showing everybody what we are doing as a board, what we're doing in our schools. Communication, I think, is our ally in showing the public that we're working to earn their trust.
Which is great. I think the board has consistently and continues to underestimate the amount of ire that is out there regarding the whole Provo High thing. The people that I talked to, the people that I initially heard, because I didn't have a child in the district at the time, about the Provo High stuff were not any of the core people that we're talking about now. They're completely different people, and most of them are on Grandview, actually, in that side. So it's not my area necessarily. People that brought it up to me more recently were not the core group of people either. So I don't think we quite understand the anger.
I have a question. Coming from my side of town, I don't understand that anger because I don't hear it.
Okay.
At all.
But I also have a question for you, Gina, since I feel like you have talked to a lot of these people. Are they misinformed about what happened? Or do they have the facts straight? Or is it, do you know what I mean? Because I know there's a lot of people who thought that because we moved the school, we spent more money. But we didn't end up, it was a higher price tag, but the money from the sale made up for it. And so we didn't end up taking out any extra, money on the bond or anything like that. It didn't cost the taxpayers any more money, even though it cost more to build than to remodel. These different, so like are the facts not out there correctly?
So I haven't, every single person I've talked to, we didn't get into it that deeply.
Okay.
The people that I have talked to about the money issues, they understand that. They disagree with the way everything went down, but they understand that.
Okay.
All of that stuff.
Okay.
I think it just felt like the taxpayers are the ones who have to pay for the bond. They're the ones who, it's coming out of their pockets. And they were under the impression that the school was going to be rebuilt on site, and then it was just ripped out from under them. I don't know if people understand, I don't know what the district is putting out there as far as why that happened. There's lots of questions about why that happened, and I think that's part of the problem. There's like this mystery surrounding why did that happen. And so
maybe that's
something where we do a write-up of our, but I don't know, would they trust if it came from the school?
And it's so
that's
old.
my thing, and that's the thing I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, I remember, I was super irritated. I remember grilling Taz, because he was on the board at the time. And I just thought it was idiotic that they were leaving, because the old location I thought was so cool. And even still, I mean, wasn't it an issue of miscalculation on how much space we were going to need in the future? So it was kind of on the district, because we did that miscalculation of how much space we need. And so I can understand people being irritated because they're like, well, we have this good place and we got to move, even though the move was better and the decision to stay there was based on faulty information. We relied on that faulty information and we've kind of based everything on it. And then we had to change it and pull the rug out from under them. So I understand people being irritated forever.
So then, okay, so like where you say maybe we need a write-up to like help people understand, I don't know if at this point if we get any of that back on that issue, but maybe what we need to take from this is we learn from what happened and we make sure it doesn't happen again. So like Jennifer said, with Dixon, we've been pretty darn open about that move from the beginning. And even though people may completely hate the choice we made, at least they're not unaware that it was happening, right? So maybe we're moving in the right direction, but what else can we learn from it to make sure that going forward, people have the correct information so that the only thing they get to hate is the decision we made and not that we gave them faulty information. Does that make sense? Is that maybe what we need to do?
I hear the same thing Gina does, and I don't think it's faulty information. It's just the bait and switch. They voted for one thing and they got a different thing.
Okay.
That's what the vibe I'm getting.
That's what people are upset about.
They voted to keep Prevo High and rebuild there, but it's not there. So, I mean, that's why you keep seeing on social media, well, why can't we use Prevo High? BYU's not using it.
And yet they are using it.
Yes, they are. But people think that BYU's not using the building because no one sees anyone out there. But that's why it keeps coming up, because people are still upset.
Yeah.
I think one of our roles when we are talking to people is to help give them the information and to, I mean, what is done is done. I don't think any of us were on the board at the time when that happened, right?
I think the only one would have been
just McKay, right? So, I mean, it's not even like us that made that decision, but I can see the reasons for it and I see why. And honestly, I look at that beautiful school now, we would not have been able to provide everything if we'd stayed on site. So if I were talking to someone who had those concerns, I can help say, and these are all the good things. I understand why you don't agree, why you felt it would have been better here, but look at all the good that we have now and how can we move forward.
So I've done that, and to be honest, they have more knowledge about this than I do, but apparently they were told there were some programs that couldn't continue on the current property that would continue on the new property, thinking, that's a good trade-off, so I'll talk about that. And then they're like, those programs all went away. And I know for sure one of them that did go away. And so, I don't have all the information, but it's like, there's just so many different things that come up. And I know that maybe McKay was the only one. We weren't on the board at that time. We're paying the price for that. So I think Rebecca's, what she's saying, I think is probably what we can do, and that is to not repeat those things now so that future boards do not end up with the same burden. My guess is there are going to be several future boards that will continue to pay the price for the Provo High move. And mine was not a scientific study, so it's not like I have a
But you've
true.
heard it enough.
Yeah, and I've heard it enough. And for before I was running for office, before I ran for the seat, I heard it as well. And so for years prior to that. So I just brought it up because so now we're on this other bond, and it continues. It's like. It's scabbed over, and then we we have to do it, right? We have to bond. We have to have these new schools. I don't know what to do.
Is anyone hearing anything else on other issues, or is it mostly on that?
I think there's always an element of distrust because it's public money and elected officials. And so I think that there will always be an element of distrust no matter what we do, because we'll always be seen in some people's eyes as the enemy just because we're elected officials. And people have a perception of politicians in general that isn't super favorable. So not that we shouldn't always try to gain trust, but there's going to be some, regardless of what we do, I think. There will always be a little bit. But what else besides not repeating our mistakes and trying to learn from the past? Are there more things we can and should be doing? I think
transparency.
I was just going to say, I feel like we've made some good steps with broadcasting our meetings.
Yes, that is, people always, that's a positive that I hear all the time is thank you for broadcasting me. So I think it's a great change.
So that's a good thing, right? Maybe going back to what we were talking about with the website, I have experienced this as well with the website. It's hard to find things on the website. Maybe something, improving the way people can get information quicker. I don't know if we can put everything on one click. That seems like that's kind of a long shot, but from taking it from 10 to 5 is an improvement, right? And I don't know about inside board docs because that's not our thing, but otherwise
but
on the
getting
website.
2 board docs, that makes it easier.
Yeah.
And people don't even know how to find that. I tried to explain it to them, and I do screenshots. Here, follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they still get confused.
And I feel like we're doing better with our social media. I really like the improvements that have been made there. I feel like that can help make a lot of strides. But what else can we do?
Sometimes when we have parents asking and hot topics come up, I don't know how we can anticipate that ahead of time and be thinking about everything that we want to tell parents. But when those come up, like the most recent ones with social emotional learning, I'm like, oh, we should definitely be making sure we're communicating to our parents, whether it's the teacher sending home what we're teaching, or we've got on our website some information so that people know we are doing these great things and we're not hiding things and stuff like that. I think the more we can put out there, the better, and the sooner we can do it before people get concerned. But how do you think about that for every single thing as we're also trying to teach our students? That's our main focus. That becomes a hard thing.
I was going to say we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Who knows what the new thing's going to be tomorrow? I think the best thing that we can do, and we've been starting to do this more and more, is just accentuate the positive things that are going on in this district and keep moving forward with that. And that will start changing that perception of what's going on in our district. If we keep saying, look at these really awesome things we're doing, that people will say, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. Or I think, there must have been, I wasn't on the board when the Provo High went down. There was definitely some bitter feelings there. And some people hold on to that grudge for a long time. So the best we can do is just, okay, let's move forward and look at all the good things we're doing.
A thought, Gina, because you're a therapist, from like a therapy standpoint, right? Like most of the time, people just want to be heard and acknowledged, right? Is there, I know this is like in the past and there's not a lot we can do about it now, but is there a way if we can like hear and acknowledge this, like, you know, point of tension for people to help them know we as a board now understand and acknowledge that they feel like there was a bait and switch, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I know the intention was never to do a bait and switch. That was never the intention of the board at the time. So I don't know that we need to say, yes, we baited and switched you, because that's not what everybody, you know, but I don't know. I think people just want to be heard sometimes. So maybe is there a way we can like acknowledge, we understand that you're frustrated at this? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It would have to be a really big therapy session. And you're right, we can't go back into the past and we can't change the past. I think part of the problem is that and you guys know this already, there's some people who feel, and it's on the west side, but it's also on the east side, who feel like the center of Provo is being gutted of schools and being moved out to the fringes. And so, I mean, we could try to heal it, but it's still actively happening, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, we could try, but it's still, in their eyes, in their opinion, I believe it's still actively happening. And I've had so many people from Mazer area and Joaquin area, and so it's not, I mean, I think it is centered right now in my area of town, but I've had plenty of people from the east reach out to me and talk about how they feel similarly, and that resources are being taken from the center of the city to the suburbs or to the outskirts. And so I think it's going to be really hard to heal that when they feel like it's continuing to happen. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I really think our best bet is transparency. I think they feel like they've been heard, at least a lot of people I've talked to, but they feel like they've been dismissed. So heard and dismissed. So which is a whole nother thing.
And how are those dismissals happening? Like why are they feeling dismissed? Because nothing's happening, or because we can't revert Provo High. You know?
No. I'm actually talking about the Dixon footprinters issue, that they've worked hard to have their voices heard and continue to be outvoted. Even like almost 3-1, if my tallying is correct, at our board meeting was, you know, the public who showed up anyway were saying we want it to stay, and then we voted the opposite direction. And I am not trying to advocate here that we need to do everything that everybody says we need to do. I'm just trying to explain to you perhaps why this is a difficult rift, in my opinion, to heal. Yeah. And I wish that I could give everybody a pill. We could all get along. Yeah, so I've run into that. This is why I brought it up. I've run into that. I don't know. I honestly don't know what we can do, if there's anything we can do that would heal it now. But I do like our thinking that I don't want to leave this legacy for future boards. And I also don't want to villainize the past board that made that decision. They were up against
and I'm sure they had a lot more information than any of us ever had.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
I think maybe one thing we can do, so moving forward, I think we can involve the community in the decision with what to do with the current Dixon property once the students move to the new site. What are we going to do with that property? I think instead of only talking about it, just us, that we do involve the community in that decision, so that they don't feel we're going to just do something that they hate.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. Something that we need to think about, though, is a lot of us won't be on the board when those things happen, and so we can say what we want, but it's going to be different people who actually make the final decision. So that's where I've had a hard time. It's like, okay, well, what can we do? What are some things we could do with that? And the responses in there are absolutely right, is you won't be on the board when that happens. So, well, that's if I run again, which is highly unlikely. And so I think it's hard for us to say, we want to work with you, even though we probably won't be on the board when that happens. Does that make sense? So it's hard to say.
But we can work to
we
put
can start
plans in
processes,
place.
right, we can start processes that will continue on, I think.
A plan is not a guarantee, but it's a lot more than not doing anything.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then if you revert back to what we talked about before, there were lots of plans about Provo High and other things that just didn't pan out. And people felt that they were promises or whatever we want to call it that didn't pan out. So, I mean, if future boards will then follow through with what this board starts, that would go a long way toward healing, but we can't bind future boards. So I think, I feel like I've just put up a lot of problems and no solutions, and I'm sorry.
Well, if I can add one thing. So the promise about no bonds for 10 years, that was made by an individual member of the board at the time. That was never discussed with the entire board, not any of the meetings I was at, and I attend them all. That was a well-intended promise, hope that it could be fulfilled, but it didn't pay off because, I mean, it probably should have been recognized that that was during the first bond since I've been here. So that was the 2014 bond. And we had a facility advisory committee that was meeting at the time, and they selected 5 of the 7 schools. The 2 remaining schools were Dixon and Wasatch. Here we are 7 years later, still having not resolved those 2 school issues. So, but I don't mean to lecture the board, but I think this board and the individual members are pretty good at this. But this is an example of how a single board member cannot be making promises on behalf of the entire board, because that's what caused it. I mean, that's the reality.
That's actually one thing I was thinking and wanted to say is we also have to be very careful about what we say and do, because we can't bind future boards, and so we need to be very careful about making definitive statements when it's just a hope or just an idea or just a, I don't know, you know.
And I think we have to be careful even when it's not a definitive statement. I have to consciously remind myself to say, in my opinion, or this is what I think, and I'm only one member of the board because, and probably because I still am a citizen, but I was on the outside of the Provo High deal and felt the same way as everybody else. And so I tried to be very conscious of that. But I think, yeah, so both.
Yeah. Which is hard to remember and hard to do sometimes.
Yes, it is.
It's hard to remember.
Well, I'm grateful we brought this up. It's definitely something we can keep looking at and improving upon, this public perception and moving forward, and let's show the good things that we're doing here, because we are doing lots of good things.
Well, we heard about one an hour ago, right? I mean,
About the audit?
That's pretty big news.
It's huge. So that ought to be highlighted.
We need a social media post. Elizabeth.
And that should be on the front page of the Herald, in all honesty.
No findings, yeah, the no findings, I mean, that's big.
Unmodified was the right word, right? Unmodified?
Unmodified.
But we have to spell that out, because no
unmodified?
no regular people know what that means.
Yeah, I wouldn't
So,
Just send them a picture of a blank piece of paper.
These are the findings.
so, all right. COVID update.
Okay, Doug, you want to join me up here? Thank you. You don't have to bring that mic. You can use this one. Just turn over Nate Brace's.
No, thanks.
Come on up. Come on.
All right.
The cameras only shows this.
Yeah, I wonder who's talking.
You guys aren't in the camera.
Not even on camera.
No.
Okay, so we have been managing some growth. I guess I have to say a couple of things, and I'll be a little like I'm always blunt. It's been frustrating to continue to get emails from parents who are saying really extreme things about what's going on in our schools, and they're basing those assumptions on what they're seeing in terms of county numbers. The county, just like last year, the county numbers were very disconcerting. They were very problematic and constantly rising. The numbers in our schools have never, not last year and not this year so far, have never to this point reflected similar percentages or proportions that we're seeing elsewhere in our general Utah County society, or even in Provo City generally. Nevertheless, we had one school earlier this week that was approaching 20 or 22, or had hit it, but by the time we mobilized, and you remember Doug's presentation to the board about being ready to move forward on test to stay, the fact is that we had, I think, 8 or 9 students at that school coming off in a similar 2 or 3 day period that at the time it would take to mobilize, they were coming off. So what I need people to remember is this. We decided on this last year, and it's still true this year. Just because you hit a number doesn't mean that something automatically happens, other than it starts a conversation with the health department. That's what happens. It doesn't automatically trigger this action or this action or this action. It means we meet with the health department, we review the data with them, and then if there's something that we need to do, such as a test to stay or something like that, then we'll get mobilized on that. This morning, or yesterday afternoon, there was a suggestion made by, I'm trying to remember who it was, I don't remember, but you were on the call this morning. Doug had a phone attached to his ear this morning, first thing when we were starting here, and it's because he was on a Zoom call with the health department. So you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, is one of the ways that they feel like they could be supportive to a neighborhood that has been continuing to rise and is approaching and still staying in the mid to even higher 20s, I think, as of this morning. So it is a problematic trend there, and we are, as the superintendent mentioned, watching how many students come off of that 14-day window, but it continues to be in that zone where there's a concern that, frankly, it's a data point that says something's going on in that neighborhood that's concerning. So the health department reached out, essentially, and said, one of the things that might help that neighborhood is to make a mobile lab testing center right there in their neighborhood. There might be people who are asymptomatic or just maybe finding it hard to get to a testing site, and they're maybe wondering if the symptoms they're having are contributing to COVID. All those sorts of things that might be, if people were just more aware, it's a good mitigating effort. And so we were coordinating in this conversation this morning with contacts from the state mobile team as well as our local county health department, and have identified that on Monday afternoon, as just an effort to support that community. This is not a test to stay protocol. This is nothing that's a district initiative. We're working in coordination like we have before when we use this campus to offer a community lab. It's a community lab that'll be offered at Edgemont Elementary School in the afternoon from 4:30 to 6:30. And again, it's going to be totally run by other agency that's going to come in and hopefully provide information for the neighborhood. How are you doing? If there's people sick in your home, or that you're just not feeling great or so forth, they feel like that's something that might help curb the spread that might be localized to that neighborhood. They said a similar effort they did about 2 or 3 weeks ago out in Eagle Mountain actually did give them good results within a short period of time. While again, initially maybe more people found out they were positive, it began to really help people make choices about their health that it helped to kind of tap down the numbers for community spread they saw in that other neighborhood. So we're hoping for the same here at Edgemont in the work that we're going to do. We are continuing to watch those numbers. None of us were able to participate this morning on the COVID safety meeting, but as I was touching base with Jason Garrison earlier today, those numbers still stay in those mid to high 20s without maybe a real close assurance that 14-day window is going to have a lot fall off immediately. So this will be an ongoing conversation as we go into next week. We don't have another COVID meeting planned until a week from today, but if we do need to begin, as you said, begin the conversation that's already begun to some degree, anticipating we're approaching a threshold, which is just essentially a trigger to start a conversation. That conversation is looming, and I think that I'd even give some credit to Alex, who's working closely with that principal there. They have gone and taken the materials that we provided this week in principal's meeting and begun to unpack everything from the form letters to here's some of the procedures that we would use that day. Let's identify a location. So in other words, some of that initial preparation work has already taken place between our staff in student services, their supervisor, and then the school staff. If we find ourselves needing to initiate that 3 or 4 or 5 day process within the next week or so.
Doug, when we mobilize Test to State, it's my understanding that, again, the state mobile testing group is the one that's going to come and do it, right?
Probably
it's not us,
yes.
It's not our people, it's them.
Yeah, as long as we reach out to them and coordinate, that's one of our steps we take. Is we reach out and we find this team who brings those resources to us. So you're right. This, again, I want to make clear, the thing we've planned for Monday at the school is not the Test to Stay. This is a resource to the community. It's meant to be a community lab. And frankly, the whole community could show up to it. We're just hoping that by its location and proximity that makes it super convenient to a neighborhood that's showing, at least by our school numbers, high levels of infection. So yeah, that'll be one of the first calls we make if we do initiate the Test to Stay, Superintendent, that we'd be asking for that state mobile team. I think they stated to me that they had 9 of these teams that could be available in short order.
And they've been busy.
The day we identify, and they would execute the plan that we essentially set up for them to provide. We would do a lot of the housekeeping organization, but they would do the actual work that requires everything from the PPE to the procedures that are associated with recording the data and everything with Red Cap. So we do have that support, which is really nice.
Right.
So I assume the school sending out a notice that that's an opportunity for them.
Yes, in fact, I was working on that a little bit. We got a flyer. It has a QR code associated with how to get pre-registered, and we're putting that out through social media and so forth. I forwarded it on to Caleb during this meeting, and we're going to make sure that it makes it onto our Peach Jar as well as other social media things. While again, it's targeted to the Edgemont community, they are happy and prepared to try and give tests to anyone who wants to come through that neighborhood. So we are going to somewhat make that a community event that anyone in Provo could come participate.
Is it a drive-up or a walk-up?
I think they're going to use the parking lot, so it'll be a drive-up. Now, whether you have to get out of your car or not, in the call this morning, it sounds like they're going to have at least 2, if not 3 different variations of test available. If someone tests positive, for instance, on the quick test, that's the quick swab, they will make available if someone wants to come back and say, I just got notification, because it takes like 30 minutes or less to find out what your rapid response was. They will always recommend come back and get a PCR test to make sure that it confirms that it's positive. And they'll offer that at the same time. If someone gets that, they can come right back into the same lab and get it that day. Of course, but this, again, the state continues to still offer labs at locations like the Provo, is it the town center?
And they're actually offering more walk-ups now.
Yeah, exactly.
Those. Before it was like you had to wait 3 days to get an appointment, and they've changed a lot of that information now.
PCR test is saliva test?
The PCR test is a nose test as well. It's kind of the deeper swab that takes place. That was kind of the first test we were using back in the day, right? Yep. These others, like the saliva test and the quick test, are ones that just kind of look at the proteins and so forth and get a pretty good indication that you have it, but they like to confirm it with a PCR test.
Okay.
Since Edgemont is in close proximity to the high school for sure, and pretty close to the middle school, are you considering also sending out a notice through those schools?
Yeah, so we're going to probably send it district-wide.
Okay.
So, but I think specifically those principals will send it like in maybe direct email information from them, from their principal. I think sometimes that's greeted a little bit more like, oh, hey, our principal invited us to come to something. So that's a strategy.
Come get your nose swabbed.
Yeah, early version of trick or treat, right? Sorry, I should have said that.
So are you
Other questions? Yeah.
Keith, are you asking our help that if the public gets mad if we hit that 30 count trigger? Because it is a trigger. That doesn't mean necessarily we're doing a test to stay. That's when we have the conversation with you want our help to help.
Yeah, I just want you to be aware, and I also wanted the folks who may be viewing this to be aware that again, it means that we have to have the conversation with the health department. We're either approaching or we're at that threshold. But again, if it takes 2 or 3 or 4 days to mobilize the team, then we also have to, like we did last year, we have to look and see in 4 days, are we going to still have this number? If 10 individuals are coming off that list, then all of a sudden it drops below that threshold, and we can't anticipate what's going to happen in terms of the number of additional ones we may get on, but the groups that we're working with, they need that certainty to know that we're there and that we're going to be there for the next 3 or 4 days. So just trying to promise somebody that, well, we think there will be another 5, how do we know? You never know.
So informing the expectations, and you guys do get phone calls and emails and contacts because your constituents know how to get a hold of you. So it's probably just, I think that this is really wise to just, while we have spent a number of meetings talking about this, we're at the threshold of possibly needing to enact that within a week or two. If the trend still continues that we reach that 30, we won't close school, we won't have kids coming to school. We'll initiate what it is that's the statutory requirement for us now to run the test to stay protocol.
And Doug, we currently have 2 schools that we're watching that could get close to meeting that threshold. Am I getting that right?
Well, I think that the Edgemont community is the one. Alex, do you have any other elementaries that are, you have another one?
Wasatch has been up and down.
But it's not nearly
been
as
up down.
close.
It hasn't really, yeah, so they seem to have curved. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a second school that, I think it was Wasatch, that the numbers begin to increase, but then they have leveled off and they're within still 10 plus more of reaching that threshold, and we haven't seen a pattern. We just have seen an incremental, like, by numbers and big steps each day over the past week or so that's again, it's got everyone's attention, including, again, gratefully, this is what's so great about the relationship. In fact, when I was on that phone call, they said, oh, yeah, we know the folks in Provo. You're the ones who helped us run that lab all last year at Grandview. You guys are great to work with. This is going to be a good event. I mean, in other words, just that they have that relationship with us, it's just nice to see that they wanted to come to our assistance in a moment that might help, not just our school situation, but they're, of course, seeing the big perspective. The community needs this resource.
But we're aware that by doing this testing, there's a good chance that puts us.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Right.
So.
And that was the principles. You just said what Harmony Karchner said in the meeting, said, wow, the results could be like like it could just really slam the door on this. And well, yeah, but it also is a preventative measure for people to know they're not well. And then we will do, and it's not going to be anything that's so disruptive and onerous and difficult for us to do to run that test to stay protocol. We're prepared. We'll do what we need to do. But people's health is more important than the inconvenience of running that test to stay. I know we all agree on that.
Okay. That's really what I wanted to cover with you, is just what the latest updates are. And that is the most up-to-date that I know of.
Yeah. Is there any other questions or things that are on your plate with COVID you're hearing from schools?
Well, I just read an article, I think it was KSL said that the numbers were a lot lower than anticipated, so.
Well, particularly the secondary level. And we've kind of gone back and forth as to what's going on that, our elementary numbers are higher, the secondary maybe not as much. Is that an influence based on what happened with vaccines? Is there something because we're not doing test to play that we're not seeing as many of the results? Is everyone reporting their results? I mean, there's just a lot of things that might be factors as to why the reported cases in students might be different than they were a year ago. But we are certainly seeing things in elementary we didn't see last year.
Thank you.
So just as we wrap up the day, I just want to say you've heard from a number of my team members and district council and others. We've got a really, I mean, the district's humming along. There's not to say that we're perfect. We've got lots of things to work on, lots of little details, but we've got a lot of really good things happening in this district. And I just want you to know of my appreciation for the folks who work in this district, teachers, custodians, all the way up through to the executives that are in this room. So thank you.
I would agree.
Thank you guys for all your hard work.
Yes, thank you. Well, as much as I know we would all love to stay longer, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.